early battles of World War II. So we're going to look at kind of the U.S. response after the attack on Pearl Harbor. We're going to look at how the Japanese responded to our responses. And then we'll even get into a little bit of the European theater as well and talk about what the Germans and the Russians or the Soviets are doing. And then that's it. All right, so let's get it started. All right, so holding the line against Japan. So after Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz, he couldn't stop Japan from advancing into Southeast Asia. So they started to attack U.S. airfields in the Philippines, and then eventually the General Douglas MacArthur decided to take his troops to the Bataan Peninsula. So this right here is the Bataan Peninsula. This is in the Philippines. This whole thing is the Philippines, okay? So he took his troops down here, and basically the idea was to have water at your back, and then you're only fighting on one front, okay? But the problem is they got trapped. They were greatly outnumbered, so FDR ordered the general to evacuate to Australia, but the Allied defenders of Bataan, eventually a bunch of them had to surrender. They didn't all get out, and so this is going to lead to what will be known as the Bataan Death March. So basically the Japanese took all the now POWs, prisoners of war, and took them up to a base, a U.S. base, and I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it is on the next slide. But they took them up to that base, and it's now a Japanese prison camp, okay? But along the way, they treated them brutal. There was all kinds of fighting and just awful. So it's called the Bataan Death March because so many people died. O'Donnell, that's the name of it. All right, so this right here shows the Bataan Death March, okay? So this right here is the Bataan Peninsula, and then this is the path they took up towards Camp O'Donnell, okay? All right. So early 1942, B-25 bombers had replaced the aircraft carrier short-range bombers, and the biggest reason is because they could go farther. They could attack from farther away. Now this, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Pearl Harbor, but this is kind of the second part of Pearl Harbor. After the attack, there's a mission, and this is what's portrayed in that movie. But Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, in the movie he's Alec Baldwin, was put in command of the mission that is going to bomb Japan on April 18th. So this made Japan change their strategy because they realized that the U.S. could actually get into the Japanese airspace. Okay, so they had to change their strategy up. So Midway Island was the last U.S. base in the North Pacific that was west of Hawaii. And it basically Japan decided they wanted to lure the U.S. fleet into battle there and then destroy them. Okay, so it was kind of they're launching a massive offensive, trying to draw the entire Navy there because they didn't knock it all out in the attack on Pearl Harbor. And so they wanted to draw the entire Navy there and destroy the entire Navy. So the idea was that not only would the U.S. fleet be destroyed, but also the supply lines to Australia would be cut too. Now their plan failed, and the biggest reason is because we had code breakers that broke their code, and then we knew what they were doing, how they were operating. Okay, so it's kind of like if you're like a football player or a basketball player, knowing the play that the other team's going to run before they run it. Okay, so the Battle of Midway, as it will be known as, became a major turning point in the war. In this battle, the U.S. shot down 38 Japanese planes. They destroyed 4 Japanese carriers, and this does stop the advance of the Japanese in the Pacific, and it starts to put them on the defensive. After this, the U.S. is going to start to island hop. Okay, so there's a lot of different islands in the Pacific, and they're going to start to hop around, trying to get closer and closer to Japan. Okay, so this right here shows the Battle of Midway. So here's Midway Island here. So to put this in perspective, there's Hawaii, there's Pearl Harbor right there. All right, so you can see how the Japanese, they're the red, how they moved into different places here, from different islands and that, and how we moved in from Pearl Harbor mainly. And this was like the biggest battle, one of the biggest battles of the Pacific theater. Okay, so moving on to Europe. So Joseph Stalin urged FDR to open up a second front in Europe. FDR he did want to enter the battle in Europe, but Winston Churchill said, we need to be a little more cautious. We can't just go in and attack. And so he wanted to attack the periphery or the edges of Germany, of their German advances. And then, so July 1942, we officially entered the war. So FDR ordered the invasion of Morocco and Algeria. So we were going to start in North Africa. And these were French controlled, which means now that France has been taken over by Germany, they're now German controlled. Okay, so these are now German controlled areas. But November 8th, 1942, we invaded North Africa under command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower. And then General George Patton, General George Patton is going to capture the city of Casablanca, which is in Morocco. Okay, so this is Eisenhower here as a general. He will later be president, and this is George Patton here. So the Battle of Kasserine Pass, basically we faced a German army for the first time in this, and General Erwin Rommel, that's this guy here, he was the German general, and he outmaneuvered and outfought the U.S. general. And so the U.S. general eventually will be fired, and Patton will be put in command, and he started pushing the Germans back. And then by May 13th, 1943, the German forces surrendered in North Africa. Okay, so you can see they started pushing back, all the way into Tunisia. Okay. So after the Germans declared war on the U.S., German subs started sinking U.S. cargo ships along our east coast, and so they got pretty close. So we started to set up a convoy system. So basically this is where cargo ships would travel with Navy warships. Okay, so this is what it would look like here. And then it was difficult to decide which kind of ship was which, and then also, obviously, the warships can fight back. And so the German submarine campaign continued, but by this point, we were just pumping ships out like crazy. So after that July of 1942, we were making more ships than they could actually sink. Okay, so that was really good for us. And that was one of our big advantages in the war is our industrial output. How much supplies and ships and different things, tanks and things like that we were able to produce so quickly. So Hitler wanted to defeat the Soviets by destroying their economy. That was his big goal. So he wanted to send his army in to capture the oil fields, the industries, and the farmlands. And he wanted to capture Stalingrad. Okay, so the idea was that he was going to surround it and then they would surrender. But what happened is the Soviets actually surrounded the Germans, and the Germans ended up surrendering. And this is going to be, the Battle of Stalingrad is going to be a major turning point on that eastern front of the European theater. Okay, D-Day will be the major turning point of the Western Front in the European theater. But as far as the Eastern Front, after the Battle of Stalingrad, Germany's on the defensive all the way till the end of the war. All right, and that's all I got for you guys today. Don't forget to do your processor, and I hope you all have a great day.